coming in, but by the time I get introductions done, I'm sure we'll have a full house. So my name's Katarina and I'm a co-founder of For Purpose, and I'm joined today by Jo Anna Lee, who also is a co-founder of For Purpose. And I just wanted to kick off by telling you a tiny little bit about For Purpose. So we started For Purpose when I constantly have people coming to me asking me about getting policy advocacy training, and there wasn't anything that was really affordable and targeted at not-for-profits. So what we did was we set this up and we started delivering training, and we also started to connect people, because the other problem we kept coming up against was the fact that people needed to be connected to have greater impact in things like advocacy campaigns and communications. So For Purpose does a couple of things. It delivers professional development to not-for-profit organisations, and Jo and I have both worked in the not-for-profit sector for many years and absolutely love it. And then after people have done professional development, it connects them through things like idea sharing and delivering webinars like this, and much, much more. So I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. We're all in many different places, and those in Canberra today. I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, and I'm in Nelson Bay, so I want to acknowledge the Burmese people as well. Now, Jo and I are both delivering this webinar today, and I am a part of For Purpose that focuses on strategy, political advocacy, policy development, and those sorts of things, and Jo is our comms guru. I'm going to start by talking through some of the reasons why you develop an annual report, and some of the thinking behind it, and then Jo's going to talk about some more of the technical side. Now, as we go through, if you have questions, please type them in the questions box on the side there of your webinar screen, or please tweet them using the hashtag FP annual reports, and our Twitter handle is at For Purpose or at Purpose. And please also see on the right hand side handouts. It's the annual report webinar slides. Okay, so here's the program for today. And today I'm going to talk to you about how we can develop annual reports, and you can go to your crew in your organisation and say the word annual report, and their mind will not be filled with lots of dread, which is currently what's happening, I know, in my organisation and other organisations when people mention the word annual report. I'm going to go through 4 different P's. The first is around purpose, so talking about why you develop an annual report. The second is around public, so thinking about who it is that the audience is and stakeholders are for your annual report. The third P is around products, and in that we're going to talk about best practice examples. So what does an annual report look like? And annual reports come in so many different forms now. We're going to talk about that. Okay, I can see that we're having some mic issues, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put headphones in and see if that helps out. And then the fourth thing we're going to talk about is promotion. Bear with me for 1 second. And then we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. Okay, I hope that sound is a little bit better for you guys now. So let's start with purpose. The first question we need to ask is, why are you preparing an annual report? Now, I know that sounds like a really basic question, but often what happens with these sorts of tasks that happen every year is we do it because it's something that we've always done. And I think that in organisations that one of the things we shouldn't do is just fall into the trap of doing things the way that we've always done them and because we've always done them in a particular way. So there are a few things you need to think about when you're thinking about the purpose of your annual report. The first is, what is the requirement? So often there is a legal requirement for us to produce financial reports, but what are the requirements in relation to you preparing an annual report? Now, that might be that you have a requirement from funders to provide an annual report, or it might be that you have a requirement from board or an expectation in the organisation that it's something that you provide to get stakeholders on board. When thinking about that also, you need to think about who are the people that you might be targeting through the annual report? And I'm going to talk about that a bit more on the next slide. And what's its role in just building brand awareness? So what's its role in being a tool or a piece of content that you can use to promote your organisation and promote what you do? And then I'm going to ask a question that might just blow your mind, because it blows the mind of my organisation and organisations I've worked in the past when I've flagged this. It's, do you even need an annual report? I'm going to tell you now, if it's a document that you prepare that's very heavy, that has lots and lots of words, that just looks pretty and sits in a corner and doesn't go anywhere, then maybe the question needs to be had on whether you need an annual report and whether the report that you're preparing is actually in the right format. I think what you'll find is you'll all come to a conclusion that there is value to having an annual report, a record of what it is that you're doing, and a shared purpose around that. But it's good to have that conversation, and it's good to have that conversation because you'll need lots of different people in the organisation involved in its development. So that segues well into the next P, which is publics. There are a range of different publics that the annual report might be prepared for. So this includes people like your board and your staff. So for organisations that have hundreds of different members or hundreds of different staff members, it's good to let people know what's going on across the organisation. Or for your board to use as a tool when they're talking to partners or fundraising, it might be a good tool for them to show what you're doing. An annual report is also good for partners and funders. This is both people who are your existing partners and funders, so they can showcase what you do, and future partners and funders so that you can use it when you're applying for funding. It also is useful for political and government decision making. And so with my background in politics and advocacy and policy, I often like having an annual report as a tool to send to advisors or to send to politicians or take to politicians to show them what we do. And I think if you also receive government funding, if it's not already a requirement for you to provide an annual report, it's good to send your annual report to the departments that deal with the work of your organisation. Another good thing about thinking about publics is if your organisation crosses a range of areas, so for example, if it crosses policy and advocacy, communications, fundraising, then you can talk to each of the different sections of your organisation about how it appeals to their different publics or their different stakeholders. That helps them to have buy-in, but it also helps your annual report to have a greater impact. So if this publication is something that you're using in a range of different forms, then when everyone's contributing all of the time and effort that they do into develop the annual report, it really does help to get them on board. So now let's talk about the third P, which is production. I think it's really important that your annual report tells a story. Like any document, whether it's a media release or it's a policy submission or it's a policy position or a letter, it's really important that it's not just a list. It's not just a shopping list of things that you did. It's not just a descriptive list. Think about something that you would like to read. And the things that we like to read are things that tell us a story or a series of short stories. So thinking about things like what case studies might be involved, who are the people that we've impacted throughout the year and how can we involve them through quotes and various messages? What are the images that we've taken through the year that we can include in this particular report? All of these different things to show what it is that you do in a different way and to show what it is that you do by showing that the work that you're doing is producing an outcome and clear outcomes for the community and that it's making an impact. Because they're the two things that funders are increasingly looking for, they're the two things that people who want to be involved in organisations are looking for, and they're the two things that governments are looking for as well. So to sum that up, just three different things to think about. It's about quality, not quantity. So as much as I know that it's hard, and we do lots of work throughout the year, and a lot of the way that we report to governments is still about outputs, you know, listing that you've prepared 50 documents or held 20 events, is all about quantity. It's not about the quality of your work. It's not about the quality of what it is that you've delivered. And also in delivering your message, it's about picking a couple of examples that show the impact of your work rather than including everything. Second point, avoid descriptions and focus on storytelling. There's a lot more of a dialogue in the sector about telling a story in advocacy, in communications, in the way that we talk about our organisations with elevator pitches, it's the same with the annual report. You need to think about what story we're trying to tell and to those different publics that we just mentioned. And the third thing is this annual report is chapter 1 or chapter 3 or chapter 23 in a book that goes on for a lot longer than this year. So you need to paint a picture of the good things to come. Let people know what could the next chapter potentially hold. Let people know the amazing work that your organisation has planned for the future. So with production, we don't only have to think about the content, but we also have to think about what the output might be. And while traditionally we've thought of annual reports as printed reports, a lot of people are moving towards things like microsites or producing their annual report as a video or an online magazine or online slideshow, or even producing your annual report in the form of an infographic or having multiple infographics that make up your annual report. Now Joe's going to talk a little bit about potential tools that you can use that are both affordable or free and can be used by people who don't necessarily have the full range of communication skills that Joe has, so more like people like me. And she'll elaborate a little more on that. But I think we often think annual report, we think a big, heavy book. But now we're moving towards thinking, if we think about our publics, if we think about telling a story, what is that output? And that output might be a range of different things. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Jo, who's going to talk a bit more about tools. She's going to talk about examples to show you how different organisations have done this. And she's going to talk to you also about promotions, and then we'll go over to questions. So just bear with me for 1 second while I change over to Jo.
Okay, thank you, Katerina. Okay, so when it comes to the time that you're looking at starting to pull all your content together, obviously you need to be thinking about what kinds of tools are going to be available to you. Now, I thought I'd start with InDesign, which is part of the Adobe Creative Suite. Probably you've heard of Photoshop and Illustrator. InDesign is another tool in that suite, and it's the industry standard tool. So essentially what that means is it's got a broad degree of capability. Yes, it costs to have an Adobe Creative Suite license, or even if you were just going to go for InDesign, you've still got to pay for a license. So it's not the most cost-effective option, but it does have a high degree of capability, and its primary purpose is really about creating high-quality publications for both digital and print outputs. That's the tool that graphic designers, or most graphic designers will use, or professional design agencies. If you don't have access to a designer or someone that can use Creative Suite, and particularly InDesign in this instance, quite confidently, you can look at a couple of other options. Now I was chatting to some of my communications friends last night about what the best alternatives would be for a desktop publishing platform for NFPs if you can't get access to the Adobe Creative Suite, or certainly a designer. And mind you, some designers will actually do this for you pro bono or at a discounted rate when you explain that you're a for-purpose organisation, etc. But if you can't get access to that, or someone that will do it for you, both Canva, which is C-A-N-V-A, and piktochart, which I'll talk about in a sec, allow you to create multi-page documents, and both of them have free versions that are available with some templates. With most of these apps, the more you pay, or the higher the license, the more capability that you'll have access to. But certainly Canva and piktochart are two options that you can explore. Okay, so Adobe Spark is another interesting tool, and while with Adobe Spark you can't actually create multi-page documents, it does allow you to create still graphics, which are great for promoting your annual report, web stories, so microsites, and I'll show you a couple of examples in a moment, as well as animated videos. So I'd urge you to think quite creatively in the planning process. Beyond that document itself, what tools can you use to then promote your annual report? Issue is another interesting tool. Again, there is a free version available. I like Issue for a few different reasons in terms of showcasing your digital annual report or the digital version of your annual report on your website. Issue actually has a Google page ranking of 9 out of 10, which basically means that if you're using Issue and you have your digital version of your annual report embedded using the Issue widget on your website, you're going to get better exposure than if you publish that digital version of your annual report on another platform, potentially that has a lower Google page ranking. Issue will also publish your document in full text. So unlike PDFs, which have limitations around them in terms of what a search engine can actually find online, publishing with Issue in full text means that that search engines actually register or understand the content, and that's going to help to boost the search engine optimization of your website once you embed it on a page on your website. You need to add metadata. Well, you don't have to, but it's a really good idea to add metadata to your embedded digital version of your annual report on your website when you use Issue, which is basically just descriptive tags and headings on the page that you embed this on your website. And that's because the content itself is going to be hosted on Issue's website and not on your own. So what you want to do is create as much other data around that embedded version of your annual report on your website so that search engines can actually read it and pick up on it. Metadata, what else do you need to know about Issue? You can actually enable downloads on Issue, so that means that the viewer has the option of either viewing the document on your website, or if you want to, you can allow them to download a PDF version from that embedded Issue on your website. The other good thing about Issue is that it actually automatically optimizes your document for viewing on both desktop computers and mobile devices. And as I said, there's a free version of Issue, and I think the next level up, if you did want to add some additional capability to your Issue license, I think it's about $44 a year. So it's not a huge outlay to get a pretty good result in terms of making your annual report as findable as possible. Now again, in terms of production, Fiverr.com, which is Fiverr.com, is essentially an online marketplace, and this could come in handy for you when you're looking for someone to help you produce your annual report. It's a place where you can find creatives or creative people, freelancers that do a whole range of stuff apart from desktop publishing. So there's people on Fiverr that can very cheaply and easily write copy for you. They can translate copy for you, they can produce videos and animations, they can also produce a whole range of collateral for your marketing. Sorry, you can all hear my baby crying in the background. I'm really sorry about that, everyone. Bedtime in the middle of the day. People can also create voiceovers for you, and that's particularly handy, obviously, if you're creating animations, and a whole lot more. Now, I did a quick search on Fiverr using the words annual report. Sorry, everyone. And I got about half a dozen results show up for people that can actually create an annual report for you. And the cheapest option that I found was a designer who was willing to design an annual report on about $5 per page. So obviously, if you've got a 20-page document, again, that's not a hefty outlay for someone who's a professional graphic designer to actually produce that document for you. One thing I would say is try and touch base with the person that you're keen on using to actually design the annual report in advance. So even if you write a great design brief, I always like to have a chat, preferably face-to-face with the person that's going to be doing this work, because it's an important document that needs to stand the test of time. So again, if you can identify the person on Fiverr that you're thinking about using, have a bit of a chat with them, try and get the most out of the brief that you can, make sure you're all on the same page, then I would definitely try and do that. So it is a bit of a risk if you're going to go the Fiverr option if you've never worked with that person before. WordSwag is a great app, again, for producing still images that you can use on social media and across other digital platforms to help promote your annual report. If you want to upgrade from the free version of WordSwag, you get other features like you can overlay your organisation's logo on top of the graphics that you create, and that's obviously a great thing in terms of building your brand recognition. And if you're really particular about, for example, your Instagram profile, if your organisation's got one of those, it might be a part of the way that you approach your Instagram profile in terms of always having to have your logo on every image that you upload. So WordSwag can definitely do that for you. Now I mentioned piktochart earlier. It's actually, I think its primary purpose is really about data visualization, which is just a fancy way of saying graphics, but particularly graphics that paint a picture of the numbers in your annual report. And not, creating infographics, but particularly ones that demonstrate the impact of potentially one of the programs of your organisation. So 90% of people that went through this program have improved quality of life, as an example. Rather than just writing that in text, think about how you can depict that in a visual way. Again, with piktochart, if you pay, as opposed to going for the free version of the license, it's going to unlock more capability, more templates, and you just have a better way to manipulate those images that you create on piktochart. Now, Kat talked briefly about photographs. I can't stress the importance enough of creating, or along, preferably throughout the year, capturing great images that help tell the story of your organisation, its programs and its services. So hopefully you don't leave it right up until the last minute to think about images. The best way to do it, as I said, is to, throughout the year, think about who you can engage to take great photographs, is that if you don't have someone on your team that can do it, but really digital cameras, so affordable, so great in terms of the quality of images that they can produce. Preferably think about capturing those images along the way, so that when you come to collating the content of your annual report, you're not then sort of thinking, oh gosh, what are we going to do about this? We've got to go to stock images. But if you do find yourself in that situation, and maybe there's a particular story that has cropped up towards the end of the year, or there was an instance where you weren't able to grab your own photos, you might want to go to stock images. And there are a lot of free sites that have a reasonable selection of free stock images that you can choose from. And the two that I think that are probably worth mentioning in the context of NFPs, certainly Flickr. If you do an advanced search under the Creative Commons area of Flickr, you can come up with some great royalty-free stock images that you can use. And also Unsplash is a great site that offers a whole range of free stock images that you can use in your annual report. But again, if you can capture your own, that's always the best option. Now I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples of some fantastic reports from the NFP sector. So you can see here, and this is not just in Australia, mind you, this is internationally. So Kiva, which is, you can see, sorry, I'll just go back to my slide deck so you can actually see the URL. So you can see there, kiva.org /about/finances/annual report. Kiva have actually done a cool thing where they've created a timeline. So you can see here, you can either click through this interactive timeline, which is essentially a series of stories that tell the story of the organisation over that year, or you can navigate through their microsite. So again, it's just like a website, much simpler than a full website. And you can either click through that top bar, or you can scroll through from story to story. And you can see here that they've got an infographic that depicts some of their finances and some of their impacts as an organisation, which is pretty cool. Also note the donate button. So again, this is a good example of an org that's using their annual report as a way to drive people to take action in the areas that mean most to them. So obviously donating to Kiva is one of their top priorities. Salvation Army, and this is the Salvation Army in the US, also have a really great microsite version of their annual report. This one's from, I think it was 2014. Yeah, there we go, 2014. So again, clicking through, using that top nav bar, they've got their donate button there. They also have a series of videos, and I won't play them now, I'll let you guys explore them. But what I've read in a case study about this particular annual report, which is the first one that the Salvos produced digitally, is that they, obviously an organisation as large as the Salvos in the US produce thousands of copies of their annual report every year. Now they ran a bit of an audit and they realised that more than half of the printed reports that they were producing were going unopened. So since then, and I think since possibly 2009, they've looked at ways of producing their annual report digitally to lower the cost of their production, but also, it enables them to actually be able to track who's opening it, who's clicking where, and what the most successful aspects of their digital reports are. You can also see here that they've got a downloadable PDF option, which is always good for people that want to tuck it away for later. All right. Charity Water. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back up to the top quickly. Charity Water, very interesting organisation. They've got a really, really simple digital annual report. So a lot of people think bells and whistles when they think digital. I would advise to keep it as simple as possible. Think about the people that are reading this annual report. People don't want to spend hours and hours wading through big chunks of text. They just want to get to the bits that they're interested in, and obviously having these great compelling images like this one of their team celebrating this one of a new donor. Really, really compelling, really, really simple, some great stats and easy navigation. So I'm just scrolling through there from top to bottom. Again, if you want to, you can use this nav at the top, which is how most people navigate websites, so it gives the user a couple of different ways to look through the content, which I think is great. Final example, Girls Inc., which is another NFP from the US. The main reason why I liked this particular digital annual report was actually the stories. And again, I won't play these videos now. I'll let you guys go through them. But they've got three case studies here that essentially it's the people that have gone through their programs and their organisations. It tells their story. Nothing like a personal, emotive story to really engage somebody and have them thinking to themselves, how can I contribute to this organisation, or how can I get involved? Again, see the donate button up here. You've got the download or print options, which is fantastic. And you can scroll through the other sections of the website. Outcomes is a heading that I love because it's not just about what we did, it's about what difference have we made. Okay. Now, I have listed in the slide deck here a whole heap of other great annual reports, and you'll see in that list there's a couple of microsites, there's an infographic, and there's a couple of other pure video reports, which I think is interesting. I'm not necessarily advocating for that as the only approach to take. I think it's important to produce, if you can, your annual report across a few different mediums so that, again, you're making it as accessible as possible to a broad range of people. But have a look at some of those for some inspiration. Okay, so just to recap on some of the stuff that Katarina covered earlier, think about in the first instance who is the end target audience, okay? So who is going to actually be looking at this? Think about then the best way to get it to those people. So if they are the kinds of people that just want to read a printed report, then that's okay. This webinar is just about showing you what some of the other options are. But again, if you're the kind of organisation that also thinks about environmental sustainability, you might want to consider how you can reach those people digitally and if it's appropriate. use your e-news bulletins or your e-newsletters if your organisation has one. Great tool, you've got a whole audience there that you can reach out to. Think about how you can promote your annual report on your blog. It's not an insignificant feat to produce an annual report, and there are a whole heap of small stories in there that are worth sharing. So whether you blog about the fact that you're launching your annual report, you may even hold an event if that's appropriate for your organisation. Think about how you can promote that on your blog, or maybe even just pick out some of those individual stories, and across the course of the following weeks or even months, you might want to republish some of those stories from your annual report on your blogs. And of course then you want to share them via social media. One platform that we picked out that we wanted to just quickly touch on was Thunderclap. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of it. It's called itself the first crowd speaking platform, which I think is an interesting term, crowd speaking. But essentially what Thunderclap does is it allows you or your organisation to send out invitations to share a tweet, a Facebook post or a Tumblr post about what it is that you're wanting to promote. So in this instance, it's the annual report. If you're going to use Thunderclap for something like an annual report launch, think about what it is that you're asking people to share. So for example, if you have a short teaser video, which could just be the chief executive of your organisation or a couple of different people in your team, talking just for up to a minute. I would say don't go any more than a minute because people will tune out, but about the fact that you're just launching your annual report and what some of the amazing content's about. That might be the thing that you want to share via Thunderclap. So it essentially allows a huge network of people to promote the launch of your annual report, in this instance, across those 3 platforms of Facebook, Twitter and Tumblr. Something to think about. Of course, you can go the old school hard copy mail out where that's appropriate. Send it out via email from your direct email account, or again, you might want to think about who are the leaders in your organisation that might want to target particular groups and send out emails with links to your annual report to those particular groups that they're most connected with. And of course, hand deliver. So you might want to, Kat was talking earlier about government relations, you might want to arrange meetings with politicians to talk about a particular issue, and in that meeting you might decide to take along your brand spanking new annual report, which is always a nice thing to leave them with so that they can hopefully ponder over it after your meeting. So think about your publics, think about what they want, think about how to get it to them, and think about some of those platforms and which ones would be most suited to your organisation and promoting your annual report. Last thing I'll just say on annual reports is, when your organisation's gone to a lot of effort to produce something like this, think about repurposing the content. So blogging about some of the content from your annual report is one way, but think about how else you can use it. So it could even just be something like picking those images, those fantastic photos that you've taken throughout the year and then repurposing them on your website, or creating still graphics that you can share on social media and those sorts of things. So create once, publish often is the mantra here. All right, we might just open up for questions now. Let me just check and see if we've had any rolling in. Does Fiverr, we've got one here about Fiverr, does it have the capacity to translate copy into different languages? Yes, so just to reiterate, the way that Fiverr works is it's a platform where people that essentially freelance with different skills promote themselves on Fiverr and offer people a whole range of different services. And one of those is translation. I've never actually had anything translated. Katarina, I don't know if you have.
I haven't had anything translated. I've just flicked a link in the answer box to that question, just a link to the translating and writing services. But I've certainly used Fiverr for graphic design and development of images and graphics and that sort of thing.
Great. Someone's also asked a question about microsites. So should you create a new site each year or the same site with new information, and what about archiving? Good question. I would say if there's a template, or the most cost-effective option would be if there's a template microsite, I would populate a new one each year and definitely archive, because you want that content to be long lasting and you want it to be preserved and you want to be able to refer back to it when needed. So ideally, I think if you had a template that you could use, it could be a WordPress template or a Wix template, and then you created a new version each year and archived the previous years, that would be ideal. And you could even just, if you didn't have much of a budget, you could just think about how the colour scheme might change from year to year, for example, to differentiate one from another. So you don't necessarily need to think about creating an entirely new site off an entirely new template each year. Certainly you could use the same template and then just think about visually how you can differentiate between one year to the next. Okay. Someone else is saying they're about to do a first annual report. How would you capture and convey all of the back-end setup work to show that we've been doing a lot to set up a foundation, to start services, thinking in terms of future donors, to see what has gone into getting us to where we are now? Really great question. So Katarina mentioned that an annual report isn't a laundry list, and it's certainly not a list of every task that's been completed, because that's not very compelling for people and it doesn't actually convey the impact that you're having. But one way that you can convey the amount of things that you've done or numbers that are important that have fed into the impact that you've had is through those infographics. So when you've reached X thousand people or X hundred people, or this many hours were spent to create this fantastic program or a tool or whatever it is that your program's using, I would think about it conveying that stuff in those terms, but certainly try and then focus it on ultimately what difference that's made to your organisation or what difference it's made to the community. So in terms of the back office work that goes into a new project or a big change in your organisation, you could certainly say that this many hours were invested and these people were brought on board, but then make sure you say this is how it's been beneficial to us. So for example, the organisation that I work for, YWCA Canberra, recently upgraded its entire ICT infrastructure. The interesting part about it is, or the most important part of that project has been how much time has been saved now in terms of our staff, and we've got about 350 staff across the ACT. How much easier and how much time it's saved in terms of those people just doing simple parts of their jobs, because they don't have to worry about outdated equipment or an unreliable server. It's also enabled things like video conferencing across our new VoIP phone system between staff at different locations across the ACT. So we've got 20 odd work sites, and now instead of spending time, and don't get me wrong, face-to-face meetings are really important sometimes, but other times it's just been fantastic with this new ICT infrastructure that we've been able to just run a VoIP conference, really simply and reliably. So that's an example of the kind of thing that you might want to talk about in your annual report, but talk about what benefit it's made to your organisation or the community. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to add, that's a really important question, because one of the things that we need to demonstrate is not only our impact and the outcomes, but that we're professional organisations that are developing these systems. So funders want to see that we're developing leaders, that we're building sustainable orgs, that we're laying the foundations. So having sections on each of those things, and then using some of the numbers that Joe was referring to. So whether it's, pulling together 10 volunteers to do 200 hours of work and hold 27 meetings, to develop this sustainable organisation or build this sustainable organisation or build this network of leaders. That's the sort of language I'd be using when you're talking about developing your organisation, because it's really important that funders see that you're or potential funders see that you're a professional org that's thinking about these things.
Good point. I'm just checking Twitter now to see if we've got any questions coming across. If you do want to tweet, our hashtag for this session is FP for full purpose annual reports. So FP annual reports.
So Joy, there's a new question about issue. You mentioned issue and that your content is stored on the issue site, not your own, but linked to it. what are your insights around management of that information?
Good question. I think, as I said, the important thing to think about is it is publishing your content on a third-party site, but embedding it on your website, and certainly, you can create your own versions of the annual or recreate some of that content on your own website in HTML format is certainly something that you could look into. I'm not sure if you're talking about privacy or the legalities around publishing on third-party platforms, but definitely I think that that's something that you should investigate on the issue website and just have a look at the different licensing arrangements and what those entail in terms of ownership of content.
Okay, Jo, another one, and I'm sure that you've had this experience quite a bit with convincing people to move.
Bring the decision makers in your organisation or the leadership team, because maybe digital is something new or it's uncharted territory. You might want to do a little bit of convincing, let's be frank. So what I mean by that is you can talk about the benefit in terms of cost savings, so the money that can be saved by going digital as well as doing a short print run potentially. That's always a good sweetener. You can also talk about the fact that it's ensuring that your content is more accessible, okay, so it can reach more people, that you can actually track who is looking at your content. So obviously with most website analytics you can go in the back end and have a look and see at which are the most popular pages, which are the pages that people are bouncing off, so that would give you an indication of the content that's not keeping people engaged. And obviously shareability on social media as well. So if your organisation's brand new to it, I would say the key points to reiterate and think about are it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. In fact, often it's a much more cost-effective way of producing your annual report than going to print. That, in the first instance, if you didn't want to create a microsite or you felt that that was sort of beyond the capability of your team, even using something like Spark, which I mentioned earlier, which is there is a free version that enables you to create these really simple web stories, which is just like some of the scrolling examples that I showed you before, like Charity Water's one is a good example. So you can do that with Spark, Adobe Spark, for free, and quite simply it's a drag and drop sort of a function. So you could even create, rather than recreating the whole or complete version of your annual report as a microsite, you could just choose some of those really compelling stories and use it more like a little teaser or a promotional tool for your annual report. So it's a much more contained project in that way. You're not, you don't have to burden someone in your team who's very new to this with the mammoth task, what can seem to be a mammoth task of creating a microsite version of your entire website. You might in year one just want to go a really simple scrolling story. And look, at the end of the day, if something happens and it doesn't get up, it doesn't mean that you don't have an annual report. It just means that it's something that you need a longer lead time to prepare for the following year. So maybe, if you're brand new to digital, start small. Maybe don't start with your entire annual report online and just, potentially go for a small or contained version of some of those stories from your annual report. Or, create a little video or just create a teaser video, as I mentioned before, potentially just with a talking head, so interview your chief executive or maybe the president of your board about, this year's annual report and what's so great about it. Share that on social media, see how it goes, and slowly build up your skills and capability in that area. And then maybe next year or in a couple of years down the track you can say, okay, I think we're ready to grow a full digital version. Of course, you can always just upload the PDF to your website, and as I said, issue is another good way to have your annual report available online. I hope that answers your question.
Jo, can I just add two things? One is that as a starting point as well, I've seen organisations build in subpages to their About Us page, which just provides an overview of their year. I think the words annual report often give us this image of a book. But thinking it as just providing information, so that's one of the ways to do it. And the second thing is, just building on Jo's hybrid suggestion, you can also convince your chief executives or boards that to accompany this new web-based annual report, you can have a two-pager that's like a two-page glossy document that you can still send out to people, and that keeps everyone happy and doesn't have you, for example, launching an online census to 20 million people in one hit without also providing them with paper versions.
Hypothetically speaking.
Okay, I can't see any other questions.
No, I can't see anything on Twitter either.
Wonderful. Well, that's efficient, 46 minutes. If there are no other questions, then we might think about wrapping this up. If people do have questions that they think of afterwards, then please feel free to email us or tweet at us. All of our information is on our website at forpurposeoz.com. And also, we just wanted to let you know about a couple of boot camps that we have coming up. So, Jo, did you just want to talk about your StratComms boot camp?
Absolutely. So end of September, I'll be running a full-day boot camp on strategic communication, which essentially takes you through step-by-step how to create and produce a strategic communication plan, either for your organisation as a whole or for a particular campaign or project that you're working on. So we cover a little bit of StratComms theory in the morning, and then we move through to some practical tools, templates and techniques that you can use in developing your plan and certainly implementing your plan. And in the afternoon there'll be a couple of live case studies. So we've got some guests from other organisations coming in to talk about some strategic comms examples that they've worked on, and we also run a Q&A. So it's a full-day event at Canberra Innovation Network. To find out a bit more about it and to register, just go to our website, which, as Katarina said, is forpurposeoz.com.
And also, just one other thing for people who are Queensland-based, we've got a boot camp on the 12th and 13th of October on policy and advocacy, which I'll be facilitating up there, also with some local friends popping in and talking about some case studies. And that information is on our website, and the registration should be open over the next week. So thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you are able to get some useful information out of this, including some useful tools, and to think about annual reports differently, so that next time someone in your organisation mentions it, I'm sure you'll all be super pumped to get involved. Thanks.